Okay. And I've still got my browser streaming. So that's all you really need to see because it's all in the browser. Um, so let's go back there. So if you're on the schedule page, I'll put a link to this in the chat so you can access that. So we just did this JavaScript intro example, and now we're going to look at P5 for a second, and then we're going to go to this P5 editor here. So all of the links that you need are right there. So this is the homepage for the P5 JS library, and P5 is essentially like a coding platform for designers and artists. It's sort of inspired by another language called processing. You can see there's a link to processing up here, and there's a few other versions of processing. And just as a quick kind of like overview, processing was invented by a couple of researchers and artists at MIT in like the early 2000s. And the goal was essentially to take programming, which is like really hard and it takes a long time to understand, and you have to do all this stuff to set it up to get it to work right. And they wanted to create something that any just, general hobbyist or artist or even somebody who's like doing research, like maybe somebody who's a mathematician and they want to use code to test some things or something like that, like people who are not trained developers or programmers to be able to get started without too much like headaches, essentially. And so the way that they designed it is with the paradigm of creating like a sketch. And so all of the examples in P5 will be referred to as sketches. And they kind of mean like, sketching on a paper, like making a drawing or something like that. And so the tools of P5 are really engineered towards creating visual art and design. You can do pretty much anything you want to do with P5. Any program that you would want to make, you could make it. But that's really kind of like the way that the creators think of it as a art and design program. And so it's also used a lot for education because it's a easy way to get into programming without having to learn all this stuff about like how the computer works and all these kind of like more technical aspects. Um, and yeah, there's a great community around it. It's all open source, and I'll talk more about this throughout the semester. But what open source means is essentially nobody really owns it. The person who creates it makes the code available to anyone who wants to use it, and anybody who has ideas for how it might work can contribute their ideas to the code. And so an example of why that's cool is this was a couple semesters ago. But I had a student who was trying to do something with her project, and it wasn't working, and it wasn't clear why it wasn't working. And so the student and I got together and we looked into it, and we realized that there was a bug in the library itself that was preventing her animation from running correctly. And we, made a little message and said, we noticed this bug and this is how you could fix it. And they fixed it. And that fix that my student figured out is now part of the library that we're all going to be using. So it's something that is kind of like open and accessible to anybody who wants to contribute to it. Which is there's a big open source software movement that I'm a big fan of, and yeah, it's part of that. So that's part of what's cool about it. Um, the editor is something that we'll get into in a second, but a couple things that you might want to use on the site. There's a get started page where it kind of like has some basic examples and shows you how to do some stuff. So that's a good place to start. We're going to kind of do this, so you don't really need to do it, but if you forgot how to get started, this is a good place to start. The reference page is really, really useful. We're going to use it a lot. This essentially has basically like a dictionary of every piece of code that you could ever want to know. And it has a good search function as well. So for example, if I wanted to know how do I draw like a circle, I can type in circle here, and there's a link, and it shows me the code that I would do for the circle. So and it gives me a description and it tells me what the syntax is, all this stuff that probably doesn't look very familiar right now, but is really useful to understand how the program works. So the reference is really useful. We'll be using it a lot. There's also a libraries page. This is where people who want to contribute things to the P5 program can just add their own libraries that work on top of it. So I use a lot of these. The one that I use a lot is P5 Play. I don't know if it's still here. I think it probably, there's a lot of them now. There didn't used to be so many. Let's see, P5.party. Here it is, P5.play. This is like a game engine that builds on top of P5. So P5 is good for like rendering graphics and images and stuff like this, and the P5 Play adds things like animation for games and collision detection and other things that you need to make a game. There's the Learn section that has a bunch of different tutorials. If you want to look into those, I don't know what the Teach section is. This is kind of new. Oh, teaching resources. Okay, so these are links to different lectures and resources. Um, and then there's a bunch of examples here that show you different things you can do with it. Let's look at one real quick. Let's look at an interaction example. So this is an interactive thing where when I put my mouse over the text, it starts to wiggle around. And that's pretty much it. And it's got some code that shows you how this works. And you can actually edit the code and change it right here. So, I can see this code says like font size. So I can be like, oh, what if I make it like, whoops, 300, and now I run it. So now my font size is really big. So it's a good way to learn code just by looking at other people's code. Um, And yeah, there's a community link here. There's a forum where you can talk with other P5 developers. And then there's a showcase. This is relatively new, but it's pretty nice. You can see just like cool projects that people have worked on in P5. And so yeah, let's see. Let's look at a project. Let's see. Artist activist interactive portraits. See if we can take a look at this. Okay, this is pretty cool. So I'm like moving my mouse around and the graphics are kind of moving. It's like a little bit of a parallax effect. And then in certain areas, it triggers sound. And then I can click on stuff and it shows me different content. So yeah, that's pretty cool. Um, so yeah, this is a good example of something made in P5. So there's a lot of other stuff on here. If you're curious to see what other types of things you might be able to make, the showcase is a good place to look. Um, yeah, go ahead.
All right, Professor, I have a question. So the Tickle program or whatever code,
Yeah,
is that all the coding that we had to put up?
yeah, that's
Um,
the whole
because I
program.
seen like a lot of okay. So
Yeah,
all that coding there, oh wow.
yeah. Well, the funny thing, so let's go back there and look at it for a second. So we're not gonna, we're, you know, the funny thing, I guess this looks to me like an extremely short program. And so for somebody who's never written code before, this probably looks really confusing and crazy. But to someone who's been doing it for a while, like this is amazing because there's not that much code here compared to what you would have to write if you were doing this like without the P5 library, for example. So P5 is doing a ton of stuff for you that you don't really have to do on your own, and you're really just this is really just like exactly what's actually happening in the program. But yeah, if that seems scary, don't worry. We're gonna get started kind of slow, and we'll be adding code a little bit at a time. Um, oh yeah, one more thing. So if you let's see, maybe this is under the books area. Uh, do, 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 do. No, I guess it's not on here. Um, there's also like uh my somebody that was actually a professor of mine when I was in school. is like one of the main like P5 educators. He has a website called The Coding Train, and this is a really, really useful resource. A lot of the stuff on here is like way, way more advanced than
This video is brought to you
uh,
by
we'll ever get to in this class. But it's also really, he's really entertaining and fun. And so, he's got some cool videos where it's not really about like learning the code necessarily. It's just like about seeing what code does. But he does have a lot of like intro lectures and stuff. So he's a good resource. Um, if you want to watch some more, uh, videos and get more ideas about coding. I'm trying to see. Yeah, all of this stuff is actually really complicated, but there's got to be like an intro level somewhere, right? Whoa, yeah. Let's see, P5 intro. Oh yeah, yeah. So he has a P5 intro. Um, Start learning here. Okay, learning playlist. That's probably a good one. Yeah. So this is like, kind of basic stuff. Same stuff we're going to be doing in class, but just another resource if you guys want one. He was a great professor when I had him, and this channel has gotten really, really big. Like you can see, he's got almost 1.5 million subscribers on the channel. Okay, so that's kind of P5. It still may seem kind of confusing because we haven't actually written any code yet, but we will start doing that pretty soon. So where we're going to be most of the time is in the P5 editor. And so there's a link here on the schedule page right here. There's also a link in Discord. If you're on the P5 page, there's also a link right here. And so let's go over to the editor. And so the editor is like an integrated development environment. It's called an IDE. If you get more into programming, that's a term that you'll hear a lot. And what that means is you can see your code and the result of your code in the same place. Most coding doesn't really happen like that. You write your code in one window. Um, Maybe you guys have used like Sublime Text before to make a website or something. Usually you write all your code in one window and then you go over to the browser or the application or whatever to see what the result is. And that's usually good, but the thing that's nice about this editor IDE is that essentially you can see your code and see the result right next to each other. And you don't have to go anywhere else. And it's also online. So you can save it all online. You don't have to save any files on your computer. There's no way to lose it. You don't have to carry a USB stick around. We're already online, so that's not as much of an issue. But yeah, in general, you can sign on to this and get all of your projects from anywhere that you might be working. So that's really nice for this class. So I'm gonna log into my account. You probably don't have an account on here. You might if you've done this before, but you probably don't. So what you really need to do is go to sign up. And you don't have to do this right now. We can do it later. But when you sign up, there's a couple options. It's pretty simple just to do username, email, password, and sign up. But you can also, if you have a GitHub account, you can connect your GitHub account. And if you want to just use your Google account to sign in, and it'll just know if you're signed into Google, that's also an option. So I'm going to go to login. It already knows me, so I'm just going to click login, and I'm going to ignore that for now. And you can see that the style of the website changed because I have my mine set to high contrast mode, usually because I'm teaching with it, and so it makes it easier to read. But you don't have to do that. You can set it to whatever you want. And so yeah, as we're looking at this, you can see some code here. I'm going to increase the font size. Okay. So you can see some code in the left-hand window. That's where you write your code. And then in the right-hand window, it says preview. That's where you see the result of your code. There's no code here, so it's just a blank canvas, but eventually there'll be stuff on there. Another thing on here is the console, which is down here. This is like our own little connection to this guy that we looked at before. So this console over here, this is the same thing. The only difference is that this console that's inside the environment only prints out messages that we ask it to. It doesn't print out like errors and Or it does print out errors, but only if it's in our code, not if it's happening somewhere else on the website. So yeah, you can hide this console or you can make it bigger if you want to. A couple other things with the interface. So there's obviously this big play button. That's what you use to preview your code. There's a stop button. So if you have code that's running an error and you want to stop it, you can click stop. There's this auto refresh button. I never use that because if you're writing code and then it refreshes, it's annoying. So I never use that. Then there's the name of your sketch, which there's a little like pencil here and you can name your sketch whatever you want. I'm just going to call this P5 Intro um, Fall 2022. And so you can name your sketch anything that you want to there, and it'll save it once you're logged in. If you're not logged in, then you obviously you can't save the sketch. So then there's a little like arrow here. And if I click on that arrow, it opens up this little file browser on the left side. We're not going to use this a whole lot because we don't really need to, but you can see what's in there. It's an HTML file, a JavaScript file, and a CSS file. And so we are making, even though we're mostly going to be writing JavaScript, we are creating a website, and a website needs HTML and CSS. So you can see the HTML file here and you can see the CSS file here. They're really, really bare bones because most of what we're doing is JavaScript related, but we still need those files just to make the website exist. Um, so yeah, that's the sketch files, and we will use this at some point. You can upload like images and sounds and stuff like that. So we'll use it later in the semester, but for now we don't really need to worry about it. So I'm just gonna keep that closed. Oh, whoops, but I stayed on my CSS page. So let's go back to sketch.js. I'll go over a couple more things with the interface before we get into writing code. There's this settings bar over here. Um, your theme is probably just the regular light theme. There's also a dark theme, and then I use a high contrast theme since I'm recording. You can change the text size. I have mine increased to make it easier for you guys to see, but you don't really need that. Pretty much everything else you can probably ignore. Autosave is on. Auto close brackets, you don't know what that means, but I'll explain it eventually. Word wrap on is useful. There's accessibility, so you can turn on and off the line numbers. And then there's a warning sound, so if you get an error, it'll play a sound if that's useful. And then there's a screen reader for plain text or table text, so you can turn on those functionalities if they're useful. Those are all the settings. You can probably just leave them at their defaults. If you want to make it more readable, I would increase the font size. If you prefer the dark theme, I would probably use the dark theme, but otherwise everything is the same. Okay, so then let's go up here to the top toolbar. So yeah, once you're logged in, you have links to like your sketches, your collections, assets, settings, and you can log out. You probably don't really need to use those. There's different languages. If you want to put it in Spanish or another language, you can use that. Um, and then over here, we have our basic like file stuff. So we can, in the file, we can create a new file, we can save our current project, and notice once I saved, it opened up some new options. So another thing that we can do that's really useful is we can duplicate a project, and you can also duplicate other people's projects. So if I create like a little template and I send it to you, you can click duplicate and then keep writing code from where I left off. So that's really useful for sharing work. Um, you can share, so this share button, you can embed your sketch. You can view the sketch in full screen. So there's nothing in the sketch, but you'll see it, you can see it without the code next to it. And then you can share somebody, the sketch with the editor so they can edit your code or look at how it works. And that's really useful for class because if you're working on something and you have an error, you can just send me your code. You don't have to like email me, or you do have to email me the link or send it to me on Discord, but you don't have to like save a file or send me a file or anything like that. You just send me a link and I can go on there and I can play around with it and then, usually figure out what the error is. Um, you can download your sketch. You don't really need to do that. You can open. So once you have sketches, if you go to open, you're going to see I obviously have a ton of sketches because I use it a lot, going back all the way to 2017. And I have all sorts of different like class examples, but I also use this for my own work a lot. Let me see if I have an example of something that I am using for my own work. This is all student stuff. Hmm. I wonder if I was making anything cool. Well, whatever. I can find something later. Maybe I was making like a notation. Oh, that's actually something cool that I've made on here. When I was making a game, I wanted to make a hex map and I couldn't figure out how to do it, so I just used P5 to figure it out. And it was super easy. I just like generate these different random maps. And you can see I've printed all this information about them so I could recreate it on my game engine. But I used P5 for that because basically I could do all this drawing without having to set up like a renderer, and so I could see exactly what the hex grid would look like on a smaller scale before I implement it into like a large space in a game. So yeah, that's an example of something that I use P5 for besides just doing teaching stuff. Anyway, let's go back to where we were. So go to open and just go to this sketch I just created. Um, you can also put your sketches in a collection. So I'm going to create a new collection for this class. So I'm going to go ahead and uh, MMP 210 fall. Oh, I guess I have to create it still. So let's go to open collections, create collection. Here we go. MMP 210 fall 2022. So this is kind of just like a folder. And so I can add all the sketches I want to. So let's just add this P5 intro that I'm doing right now. And there we go. Now I have a collection and I can share this collection so you can see all of the examples in one place. And actually I want to put this on Discord. So I'm going to go ahead and do that right now. So I'll go to info, MMP210. Let's edit this and say, whoops. Let's put a little computer here and say class examples, and I'll put a link there. Okay, sweet. Um, okay, so let's go back to the editor. Another thing that's really useful under the file menu is the examples. You can see examples, all of the stuff that we saw on the P5 examples page are on here. And so you can see examples of all sorts of different stuff. So if you're curious about how to do something, you could go in here and look for an example. So let's say we wanted to like do something with audio, or I guess let's try sound. Okay, so here's a sound thing, oscillator waveform. That sounds kind of cool. Let's see what that is. Okay, so it's like drawing the waveform of a synthesizer, and you can see all this code. And so you don't have to like write it from scratch. You can just look at how did this person write this code. Looks kind of crazy, but what you can do is just go to duplicate and create your own version of it, and then build on it from there. So P5 is really designed to be uh, very easy to kind of uh, find other sources and modify them and create your own work based on previous code. Um, okay, wrapping up the interface. So the edit section, the tidy code is really, really useful. The key command is, I guess, Control Shift F. Let's see if that works. What that basically does, um, if you've written HTML before, this will make sense to you. Basically, like the code doesn't have to be, but wants to be, but it's better if it like looks correct. So if I have this background like on the same line as this function, it looks kind of weird. And if I hit, I think Control Shift, nope, not that. What was it? Control Shift F. Whoops. See how it fixed that for me? So that's super useful because you might be writing a bunch of code and you add a bunch of different stuff and it looks all crazy. If you just hit Control Shift F, it'll just fix it for you. So that's really useful when you first getting started and you're not sure what all the different conventions are for how it's supposed to look. That tidy code will help you fix it up. Then this we don't really need, and the help section is useful. There's some keyboard shortcuts that will tell you how to do stuff quickly. The one that I find the most useful is just Control Enter, which will just run the sketch for you, so you don't have to move your mouse and go hit the play button. I use that a lot. Um, so that's the keyboard shortcuts. There's also the reference page. This will just take you directly to the reference page for P5, so that's really convenient. And there's a little about section, but we don't want to do that right now. Okay, so let's pause here and take a second to sign up for a P5 um, account on the app, and then we're actually doing pretty good on time. It's almost 5, so we have like 40 minutes. So let's take a break for a few minutes, sign up for P5, and then we'll get started actually writing some code after that. So I'm going to stop recording.